Uh, Hi everyone. Hope you are all doing well. And welcome to our first meetup of this year. And so excited about this meetup. And we have like four speakers today. And our first speaker is Gaurav from Small Case, and he will be talking about how they are using multi-tenant frontends. So without any further delay, I will invite Gaurav to the stage. Hi Gaurav.
Hey, hi Kiran, hi everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me just present the slides. Let me know if you guys can see the slideshow.
Yes, we can see you. Yeah, maybe we'll get started.
Cool, cool. Yeah. So today I'm going to talk about multi-tenant frontends in general and with some specific examples from what we have been building at small case and my experience with building SaaS apps at small case. Uh, some quick things about me. I live in Bangalore. I work at small case. I live with my wife, my dog, and my baby. And some of the things that I'm currently interested in are accessibility, front end architecture patterns, design systems, general standardization, reusability, and workflows processes within teams and within front end. On the right hand side are my social handles. Cool. Just setting expectations for this talk, what you should be expecting and what you should not be expecting. So, like, since it is going to be a short talk, like about 25 minutes is where I would want to keep it at. And I would not assume any familiarity with a multi-tenancy. So, in general, this talk would more be about an overview of what multi-tenancy is, and it will also give you an overview of some common challenges faced while supporting multiple tenants, but like across the span of the whole stack, not only with respect to the DB or the API or the backend, but more in context of front end and code base and development and things. Uh, Also, I think like a lot of you, if you have been working with SaaS applications, you might be doing a lot of these things without even realizing that you are building multi-tenant front ends or multi-tenant apps. So this talk would probably help you structure or formalize your thought process around that, and maybe like it will allow you to research things better because now you would be able to put a name to what you're doing. What not to expect from this talk? So this talk is not going to be in depth about anything. We are not going to talk about a lot of backend things, which I like DB or even infrastructure or API or services. This talk would also not cover all the use cases in the wild about front end architectures because, like, with the advent of SaaS apps, you would see that there are a lot of different patterns that everyone is using. And this talk would also not talk about the exact technical implementation of things, like in terms of how to enable something in React framework or how to enable something with AWS stack or anything like that. It will be more general. Moving ahead to overview about what exactly is multi-tenancy. So multi-tenancy in simplest terms is like supporting multiple customers in your application. I think every one of us would have worked in some application which would be used by more than one customers. Now if you have a B2C application, those customers would be your users, but if you have a B2B2C application, your customers would be the businesses. Now, even if you have a B2C application which supports multiple users, that itself is a multi-tenant app. But like those challenges or challenges related to architecture of those applications have already been solved and are generally a known pattern. But supporting multiple businesses has like some unique set of challenges just because of the stakes that are involved and also the kind of architecture that you need to provide to your uh, business customers, or like these are what we are calling tenants throughout this talk. So like why is a multi-business thing different from a multi-user thing? Because like with when you do a multi-business application, or uh, you would need to get into a contract, you would need to take care of security because there would be compliances regulations on those businesses, you would need to ensure high availability and a lot of things. So, like the overall stakes are much higher than a B2C application, and also like these businesses are going to pay you a lot, while like end users may or may not be uh, that much involved in the commerce of your application. Cool. So in general, what we are going to talk about is how to support multiple tenants. Now, supporting multiple tenants can happen through two patterns. One is single tenancy, another is multi-tenancy. So like, I mean, you can actually just support multiple tenants using a pattern called single tenancy as well. So we'll quickly go through what is single tenancy and what is multi-tenancy, and then we'll move forward to challenges. So just single tenancy is when there is a completely separate instance of the application plus the infrastructure for each individual tenant. So each individual instance of the application and the infrastructure is physically separated. So you can like think of it in terms of some application which you install on the client site itself, like they have their own cloud, you just like install that application for them. While multi-tenancy in general in strict terms is like when one single application instance serves all the tenants, and like there is no physical separation but there is still logical separation between tenants. This is what most of the SaaS apps today are doing. So some examples of these apps would be Slack. Like Slack is something which supports multiple tenants, so you would find smallcase.slack.com or yourcompany.slack.com or other things. Similarly, like we at Smallcase are building a lot of such multi-tenant SaaS applications. Then any other business, they would, if they are a SaaS business, I think in most cases they would be building a multi-tenant application. So if you have worked with like Fresh Team, I think Fresh Team is again a multi-tenant application. Postman is a multi-tenant application. So a lot of examples in the world. Cool. So like in general, multi-tenancy and single tenancy is talked about or differentiated based on the infrastructure and the DB. As I said that like there is a separate instance of the app plus the infra, which means there is a separate DB for each tenant. There is a separate ALB for each tenant. There might be a separate CDN for each tenant and whatnot, right? And that generally makes sense. You will find a lot of articles about it because there that is where all the security or the availability or isolation concerns come in, right? But in this talk particularly, we are not going to talk about these concerns. We are actually just going to talk about what are the other auxiliary things which are involved when you are developing a multi-tenant application. So things like what would be the ideal team structure, what would be the code base organization, what would be some component patterns that you can use, what kind of like how your tech stack impacts what kind of multi-tenancy you would choose, or in terms of business, who has more control, the tenant has more control or you have more control, which will help you decide how you would enable multi-tenancy in your application. And all of this would more be in context of front end plus the front end infrastructure. So expect nothing from the DB or services side. Cool. So this is a quick comparison between single tenancy and multi-tenancy. So by now you would have understood that single tenancy is where like there would be one single instance. So it can be an on-site deployment. It can also be cloud-based, but like that would be specific to the tenant. Multi-tenancy, on the other hand, is completely cloud-based SaaS applications generally. Single tenancy is arguably more secure as your tenant data is isolated. There is no way that someone else can just breach this data because some other tenant has been breached. While on the other hand, data in multi-tenancy is logically isolated but physically co-located with other tenants. So it means that you might be using the same DB with different tables for each tenant, or you might be using the same table for each tenant, but like they are just logically separated by a primary key. Then with single tenancy, maintenance is costly because you have your own instance of the application. There has to be some kind of maintenance. Generally, you would get into a service contract with the provider to actually get their people to help you with maintaining this application. On the other hand, multi-tenancy is like hands-off maintenance. It is completely maintained or managed by the SaaS provider. Single tenancy has physical separation, multi-tenancy has logical separation. Single tenancy has isolated backups, so there is quick disaster recovery. Multi-tenancy has shared backups, and like if something goes down, it will probably go down for all the tenants. But then, like with the robust cloud infrastructure that everyone has nowadays, this is generally not a problem. Then single tenancy can provide you more control or provide the tenant more control and potentially more customization because you have the like application instance completely to yourself. So the developers or the SaaS provider or the application provider does not really think about what impact this change is going to have on other tenants. They can just build it for you. Obviously you will need to pay more, but I mean you have more control. With multi-tenancy, generally there is less control because all the customizations that need to happen would impact the other tenants in some way or the other. But on the other hand, updates are quick. So if there are some security updates that are required, it will go to every tenant all at once. Similarly, single tenancy has more availability or more dependability just because it is isolated. Multi-tenancy, other neighbors can actually uh, impact how your application is working. So if there is one single shared server for all the tenants and one of the tenants has high footfall on a particular day, it might lead to slowness for the rest of the tenants as well. But like these are also solved problems, and with the robust cloud infrastructure, I think this does not really happen. This is like more theoretical. Then single tenancy major problem is there is less efficient utilization of resources, and which is why it is costly. Multi tenancy, you can share your resources, which is why there is more efficient utilization. One thing to note in single tenancy versus multi tenancy is like you don't really need to share your code with the tenant, right? So you just share the instance of the application, so the code is still owned by you, right? In both single tenancy and multi tenancy, it's not like you provide them the code as well. Cool. So, like strictly talking about multi-tenancy, I think we have discussed that it is more discussed in terms of the infrastructure stack or on the backend side, but just extending that definition to include a lot of other things. So, like multi-tenancy can generally have implications in any part of the stack, like code base, build, services, DB, CDN, your load balancers, and other pieces of infrastructure. So, like you can some examples, you can have individual builds for each tenant, but each of these builds are simultaneously running in one single server. You might be sharing the same DB but different tables. You might be sharing the same DB, same table, same schema also, and just differentiated by a primary key or the tenant name or the tenant ID. You might have a single build but different CDNs, CDN distributions for each tenant. There might be like a single build or a multiple build, and there would be different EC2 servers serving to this. So there are a lot of options, which means that every part of the stack somehow contributes to multi-tenancy, and like there is no black or white definition of when something is multi-tenant or not. So that is not the point of discussion today as well. Like we are not going into the strict definition of what multi-tenancy exactly is, but we are going to discuss how to enable multiple tenants or multiple customers in your app. So just furthering this point, I think taking inspiration from the ship of thesis, I think like look at all of these examples and think about when does a app stop being the same application, right? So like one of the examples is you have single code base, single build, single deployment, single CDN, and that is your app. You can still support multiple tenants here. Then you might have multiple builds, multiple deployments, multiple CDN, where you have one single code base. Now this again is also the same application because it is providing the same functionality to all of its tenants or all of its users. Similarly, you can have multiple builds but a single server and multiple CDNs on top of that single server. Similarly, you can have multiple code bases where each code base is per tenant, and multiple builds, single builds, or a lot of these combinations. But like I would personally call all of them multi-tenant because the final functionality that the application is providing is can be recognized as one single functionality that the application provides, and all of this complexity is hidden behind that final instance of the application. Uh, cool. So that was more of an overview of what in general multi-tenancy is, or how multi-tenancy differentiates with single tenancy. Now we'll quickly go on to the challenges that you might face when you're implementing multi-tenant code or developing a multi-tenant front-end application. So the first challenge is how do you identify tenants? Uh, so for identifying tenants, there are two broader ways. One is you can have separate builds for each tenant, with in which case you will already know at build time what is the tenant, and based on that you will create some individual build for that tenant. But obviously, even just hearing that, you would know that it is not the most optimal thing to do, because if you have 150 tenants, why create 150 builds for them when you can just have one single build? And identify the tenant at runtime. So identifying the tenant at runtime generally depends on the URL. So you can have domain-based multi-tenancy, subdomain-based, path-based, query param-based, any part of the URL basically, even hash also. So there are some examples that I mentioned about how the URL would look like if you were to identify the tenant information from the URL. But like for some use cases where our application uh, does not directly depend on the URL, you can use other ways also. Like for example, you can send this information in HTTP headers if it is a server rendered application, maybe from the like initialization point you can just send this information in headers, or you can not change the URL, but whenever the user logs in, you know which organization they belong to, so you just customize everything for that user, for that organization. Or any other communication patterns like post message. If your application is an iframe, then the parent application can just provide the tenant information in post message. So any communication patterns work based on uh, what what kind of requirement your application has. So we'll also look at like how do we figure out which method for identifying tenant to use. So one of the major things is different methods have different infra requirements and would lead to different costing. So if you are going to have a domain based multi-tenancy, which means that the top level domains would be different, which means that you need to have a like uh, certificate for all of those top level domains. You would need to have a route 53 entry or a DNS entry for all of those separate domains. You would possibly need a separate CDN distribution for all of the top level domains, because it is not very easy to actually set up a CDN uh, across multiple domains with the same caching policy. So this is like one thing that will impact your decision. Another thing is the tenant branding that needs to be conveyed to their user. So like it might depend on the contract between you and the tenant, but maybe you can have something like app.com/tenant1 versus tenant1.app.com. Like this tenant1.app.com has more visibility for the tenant branding, and app.com/tenant1 looks like it is your app and there is some space for the tenant on your app. So this can be another factor based on which you can determine which one to use. Third thing is who owns the application, you or the tenant. So in some cases, like you are the application provider, sure, but your integration with the tenant is done in a way that your application is just an extension of the functionality they provide, and each individual tenant legally owns that application, right? So in those cases, uh, it wouldn't be possible for you to actually use anything other than domain based multi-tenancy, or at least like there would be some abstraction which will finally lead to domain based multi-tenancy. Similarly, how the user would land on your application, uh, uh, are they supposed to land on the URL directly, or like is this application just a iframe application which opens from within a parent where the URL is not even visible to the user? Based on that, it also impacts which method you would use. Another thing that would impact this decision is where in the application life cycle do you need to identify the tenant. So like in general, if it is, let's say, taking the example of the iframe application once again, if it is uh, initiated by someone from their own website, like the tenant website, and the user does not need to see the URL, then the only place where you need to identify the tenant is when the application initializes, because every this information can then be kept in the browser memory or the application memory, and like you are okay for the rest of the application lifecycle. But if it is a server rendered app and it is a possibility that some user action might trigger another server rendering, then you need to have a way to actually persist this information or to get this information from the URL, right? The next thing is customizations. What kind of customizations you can expect for tenants? So customization depend on the kind of integration you have with the tenant. One general pattern is you have your application which already has all the functionalities, and the tenant want to integrate with your application so that they can extend your functionality to the users, right? In this case, you have more control because you create the features, you implement the features, and the tenant can just integrate with those features, right? But there is another type of integration where you actually depend on the tenant functionality uh, to provide some functionality to your users, which are like finally the tenant's users. So in that case, the tenant has more control because, like just giving you an example, let's say you are creating a loan application which integrates with the existing bank's system, and you need to provide the loan functionality to your users. Now, since all the existing banks implementation of the loan functionality would be different in terms of what kind of loans they provide, what kind of duration they provide, what kind of interest rate they provide, so you will actually need to customize your application code to cater to all of these cases. You cannot just go to every bank and say that, okay, I want to provide loans only for these periods. So please make changes in your application code to only allow these kind of loans, right? So in those cases, you will actually have to maintain one component per bank for the loan thing, right? So there the tenant has more control. General customization that you can expect, custom components with custom UI or logic for each tenant, the same example that I just gave. custom JavaScript functionality for each tenant based on their exposed and API interface. So like again, if you need to integrate your application within the tenant mobile application and they already have some methods exposed for integration, then you may or may not be in a position to say that okay, we are only going to respect certain method names and not the others, because like again, if you are using the tenant functionality to extend it to your users, you have to agree to their existing interfaces. Similarly, a very common use case is to just customize UI strings, whatever is shown on the UI. Another requirement that we have seen in the wild is that every tenant wants to integrate some kind of logging or analytics which is specific to them. Then feature flag for sure you are going to have, because feature flags is the core of how you enable or disable certain functionalities or customizations for the tenant. Every tenant or each tenant might require some kind of theming capabilities and more. So these are some general customizations that you can expect based on who controls the feature development of the application more, the tenant or you. Next, we'll talk about some code based organization patterns and development. So the main thing here is feature oriented versus tenant oriented, which I've already explained in a way. Like, if you control the features, if you implement the features without depending on the tenant functionality, and the tenant just integrates with you to expose your features to their users, it is more of a feature oriented thing, because you don't really care about tenants and how many tenants are going to integrate with your application, because you do not have any dependency on tenant side functionality. On the other hand, if you have a dependency on the tenant side functionality, like the loan example that I just gave, you need to have a tenant oriented development where you will need to customize a lot more than feature oriented development. So for code based organization, I think for feature oriented development there is not a lot of problems that you would face, because you can just have a single code base with slight modifications to your components based on some feature flags, and like you can just use a runtime config for customizations, right? But with tenant oriented development, you would probably need to make this decision at build time, because you have 70 components which are customized for each of the tenant. You It is like very difficult for you to identify at runtime which of these components to load, and even if you load them, like they should be compiled bundles of JavaScript code. You cannot like compile them on the fly. So generally, like the easiest thing here to do here is to just have a compile time uh, multi-tenancy, where you will have separate builds for each of the tenants. Then talking about builds, deployments, and infrastructure in general. So like if you choose runtime customization, where you will get the tenant config from an API call at runtime, you can just have one single build for all the tenants, because there is nothing that changes across tenants for those builds, right? Because all the customizations are happening at runtime. So like in those cases, for a single page application, you can just have one single build. You can just put it as a static hosting somewhere. For a server ended application, you can just have one server which can horizontally scale for tenants, but there does not need to be a tenant specific server. On the other hand, if you choose build time customization, then you have to create multiple builds and have to do multiple or individual deployments for each tenant. So like each individual deployment in case of SPA can go to their own S3 buckets for static hosting, or for SSR each tenant server might be deployed individually, or like you can still have multiple deployments in a single server also. uh, Similarly, for deployments, I think just extending from the previous point, generally you would, if you have an SPA, you can just like deploy it all together because it is static hosting. If you have SSR, you just need to make another decision about how you would scale the server, or how would you make sure that there is one server which can cater to all the tenants. But like in this case, there can be some performance problems that you will face, which is like separate. If you have separate deployments because you have separate builds for all the tenants, then if you have more than 100 tenants, for example, then every time you do a release, you will need to create 100 builds. You'll need to do 100 deployments, which can easily take 1 hour, 2 hours, which means like rolling back to a previous version of the application again is costly, because it will take 1 hour or 2 hours. So like generally, I think we have figured out, if it is a feature oriented development, let's just have one single build and one single deployment. If it is a tenant oriented development, uh, cannot do much. We have to create multiple builds and have to do multiple deployments. Then, in terms of infrastructure, some of the questions that you would need to answer does each tenant need its own different caching policies? With feature oriented development, not so much, because I think those kind of customizations are generally not possible. But with tenant oriented development, you might have some different routes altogether in your application for different tenants, which might need some different caching policies across tenants. So sure, you would probably need some different caching policies. Similarly, like, do you have one single CDN, one single server which can serve all the tenants, or do you need multiple instances of those? Do tenants need their own domains for hosting the application? This is like domain based multi-tenancy. And if the tenant owns the application, they would want you to just host the application on their URLs, not on your URLs, right? So that also changes some part of the infra decisions that you can take. In our case, for example, there is a tenant oriented development code base where out of 15 tenants, there is like one or two tenants who actually host the application on their infrastructure. For the rest of them, we host it on our infrastructure. Or uh, how do you scale for individual tenants is another question that you have to ask. If there is just one single server for all the tenants, then like how would you make sure that a particular tenant users are not going to uh, impact the users of the other tenant? There are some other smaller concerns that you will face as well. Some of them I'll just quickly go through. How do you deploy maintenance mode for individual tenants? So like you just have one single build, one single deployment. So how do you make sure that one tenant for some reason needs to go into maintenance mode? How do you do that? So like you can solve it using multiple things. You can solve it at the CDN level, or you can just solve it through config if it is a runtime based multi-tenancy. With customized builds per tenant, this is not a problem, because like you have different deployments, so you can go to each one and just put in develop to the maintenance mode. Another concern is like if you have a error tracking software and if you have multiple builds, then the same error would appear in across all of the tenants. So how do you like have workflows around making sure that uh, all the tenants can have that error resolved if you resolve it for one tenant, like on the software, not on the code. In the code it would be resolved because there is one single code base. Similarly, there are some concerns related to testing. So if you have separate builds for each tenant, you would need to test each build individually, because there is no other way that you can make sure that all of the builds are working fine. But if you have one single build, then you can just test different combination of features. This is more useful in feature oriented development. If you have multiple builds, then like how do you maintain dev staging environment for each tenant? Let's say if you have 15 tenants, do you have 15 dev environments? Do you have 15 staging environments? Or like, do you test tenants one by one in just one environment? You deploy the first tenant, deploy the second tenant, deploy the third tenant. Or like in case of code base, how do you make sure that you can write or maintain test cases per tenant, because it is a single code base? And like if it is a feature oriented code base, then you probably do not need to write tenant specific test cases. But if it is a tenant oriented code base, then you need to have test cases per tenant. So how do you write them in code? Feature flags, again, I've already talked about, is one of the core things that you would need to have if you want to have any kind of multi-tenancy. So for this, like generally we are just using our own implementation of build time feature flags and runtime feature flags, but there are some frameworks out there which you can also look at to help you with this. uh, Another smaller concern is team structure. So like in tenant oriented development, if you have a lot of customizations that need to happen for every tenant, you might choose to have one team per tenant, like one small dev team per tenant, and one team which is taking care of the common code base. While if it is a feature oriented development, generally it makes sense to just have one single team which looks at everything, because that team does not really need to know about every tenant, or there are like customizations across tenants, because they only need to care about customizations and features, and that the product can control. Similarly, tech stack is another consideration. If you have an iframe application, it will change a lot of things in terms of how what strategy you choose for multi-tenancy. If you have a SSR application, it will also impact the strategy. SPA is generally the easiest, generally the simplest, because like you can just keep the tenant info in memory, and like you can just read it at initialization and just keep in browser storage. So generally the easiest implementation. Another smaller concern is how do you scale tenant onboarding? So let's say right now you have 10 tenants, but you are expecting 100 tenants to come tomorrow, or like by the end of the year. Then you are not obviously going to manually create everything for each of the tenants. Like you are not going to manually create all the infrastructure. You are not going to manually create new folders in the code base for that tenant. You are not going to manually maintain all of the tenant specific configs. So there has to be some kind of a control center or a CMS where someone from the either the tenant team or from your team can control things directly without going into the code base or without needing a separate deployment. Right. So all that said, I think I'll just quickly walk you through some of the multi-tenant front ends that we have at small case and like how they are implemented based on whatever decision making criteria we have discussed till now. This should be quick. So the first one is gateway. It is an iframe app. It does not need to be directly reachable from URL. So we use query param based multi-tenancy because it is a single page app. So we don't need to have different like caching infrastructure for tenants, or we can do with query param based multi-tenancy because even if we get the query param at the time of app initialization, we can just store it in the memory and we can just read it from the memory because no one is going to reload the iframe, or no, there are no links to get outside of that iframe, right? So this is very easy. So uh, this one is feature oriented development because like we provide the features to our tenants and we do not depend on anything from the tenant side to actually implement our features. This has a runtime configuration which is fetched from DB based on tenant identification from the query param. This is a single build, single deployment. The only major issue with this is like the SDK that manages the iframe lifecycle. Like this application has to be opened by someone, and we provide an SDK to the partner to just call SDK methods which will maintain or manage this iframe lifecycle for them. So that SDK, since it lives inside the tenant website, not inside the iframe, so there are some concerns around how we can have our own tracking or analytics implemented, which does not disturb whatever is already there on the tenant side. Then the other front-end multi-tenant code base that we have is publisher microsites. So this one has subdomain based multi-tenancy and again feature-oriented development because we provide all of the features and tenants just integrate with us. This again is a single build, single deployment. We chose to do this as an SSR. Tenant, since it is an SSR, the tenant needs to be identified throughout the app lifecycle because there can be server side requests as well where you would need to send the tenant information, which is why we chose subdomain based multi-tenancy. This one needs to be directly reachable by URL. Another reason to have URL based multi-tenancy. Tenants can customize things like text strings or switch on or off some features. They can also change some branding about their photos, their names, and things like that. And we use a runtime configuration based on tenant identification. This code base also has a control center where some part of it is exposed to the tenants where they can just come and change things, and it just re-triggers the deployment of one single build, and changes are available immediately. There is another code base called the distribution module where we again have subdomain based multi-tenancy. This is again a single build, single deployment, but this one is an SSR plus iframe. And in the future, it might be directly reachable from the URL as well. So we went for a subdomain based multi-tenancy in this case. Since it is an SSR, tenant needs to be identified throughout the app lifecycle because like any SSR request, we need to have that tenant information passed on to the server. This is a feature oriented development. Tenant can just customize some of the functionality by feature flags. It again, since it is a feature oriented development, we could afford to have runtime configuration. The final code base that I'm going to talk about, which is slightly different from all the rest of them, is the broker platform. The links to that, you might say this is like the main small case web platform. So here we have domain based multi-tenancy and we have tenant oriented development because we need to use the tenant functionalities to actually build our functionalities on top. For example, if the tenant does not have a way to do an SIP in stocks, it is very difficult for us to build that functionality because we use their functionality to build our functionality. So in this case, if different tenants have different implementations for how they do or how they allow SIPs, we need to have a specific code or specific component for each of the tenants to make sure that we can cater to their specific implementation. In this case, I think again there are some tenants which own the part of infrastructure because they own the app legally. Like if you see the URL is smallcase.zerodha.com, not zerodha.smallcase.com. So like it is their application, they own the application. Just that the product and the software is provided by us. And in most cases, the infrastructure is also provided by us, but there are some tenants who choose to host the application on their side. This one has multiple builds because this is tenant oriented, so we need to have a build time multi tenancy. So separate build for each tenant. And if there are multiple builds, it leads to individual deployments, which means that we actually test for 15 different tenants at a time whenever we do a deployment. And how we have implemented this in the code base is that there are multiple ways. We could have used a monorepo to host the code for each individual tenant in their own repo, in their own repo, and like we could have just had the common code in its own repo as well. But we have currently chosen to just keep everything inside the same code base and within multiple folders within the same code base, because like the one single team works on everything right now. The final thing is, like in this case, since it is a domain-based multi-tenancy, we need to have different CDN distributions, because caching is generally based on URL and it is very difficult to implement it otherwise. And in some cases, since the infrastructure is not owned by us, we cannot anyway have a CloudFront or any other CDN in between. It is for the tenant to take care of. So like this was a quick introduction of uh, most of the things that I have learned by building SaaS applications at small keys. Uh, as some of the next steps, I think since I already knew that this would take around 30 minutes or so, even at the speed that I'm speaking, I think I would say that any follow up questions you can directly mail me or you can ask me on Twitter. I will try my best to answer. Another thing is like this talk is going to be very soon converted into a blog post, which will have all of the details that I talked about and which are not on the slides. So that I'll post on Twitter as well. The link to slides, I think, yeah, I'll post on Twitter as well as in the comment section here. We are hiring at small case, so in case some of you find this interesting, there are a lot of other similar challenges that we are solving at small case. Please feel free to reach out to me or anyone else at small case if you are interested in an opportunity. Yeah, I think that is it. Thank you so much, everyone. If you have any quick questions, I think I'll answer them. Otherwise, I think I'm already out of time.
Hi Gaurav. Yeah, I think we have some time for a couple of questions. Yeah, it's really a nice talk, you know. Yeah. I think we have one question from Jay. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, should we let backend handle feature level separation instead of generating multiple builds unless there is a separate deployment for backend as well? Okay, just trying to understand this. So, feature level separation, by that you mean feature customizations, I think, instead of generating multiple builds. Right. So, this multiple builds is required because the front end component has to be different for each of those tenants as well. Like it is not just feature functionality which is going to be different. For example, if one broker allows you to do an SIP only on certain days in a month and the other broker allows you to do an SIP on all the days in a month, then the logic for this can be on the backend, but the UI that you show to the user would also need to comply to this. So you, if you show a calendar for the users to choose dates from, you cannot show all the dates for that particular broker which allows only selecting certain dates. So there has to be some kind of UI component customization which has to be part of the component code base, and which is why the UI also needs to have different build. But if it was only a functionality customization where the UI could remain the same, yes, I think we already do it at the backend layer. Does that answer your
uh,
question?
yeah, makes sense. Others, if you have more questions, you can ask now. We just wait for a couple of minutes. On a side note, Jay is from Gojek, and he mentioned that they have some openings, and if anyone is interested, you can reach out to Jay.
Nice. Yeah, repeating that for small case as well. We have a lot of openings as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think we will share. Okay, we have the Ankit Jain.
How are you going to handle dynamic JavaScript on multi-tenant with React.js? Is that the question? I think, yeah, this is the problem for which we need this build time multi-tenancy. We need to decide at build time what JavaScript code has to be included in the build for that particular tenant, because we cannot make that decision at runtime. because we cannot just fetch that JavaScript function at runtime and run it. It has to be compiled into a bundle and then exported as a module with your bundler. Only then you can do that. So the only way that I can see right now is you compile your application for all the tenants. You have all the bundles available at runtime, and you can just decide which bundle to load at runtime. But that is not an efficient approach, which is why we went with the build time multi-tenancy. So we build it separately for each tenant. So the particular JavaScript code that is required for that tenant is already part of that build. We don't need to fetch it at runtime or decide at runtime what code to fetch, or like which tenant specific code to fetch. I hope that was the question.
Yeah, I think Jay's follow-up comment with for the previous question, but yeah.
Yeah. So I think
So
in the tenant oriented code base also we do actually have a lot of things which are config driven, which can happen at runtime. But this problem where you have separate components or separate JavaScript handling for tenant specific things, yeah, that is very not easy or not efficient to solve at runtime. But yeah, in our case, the advantage that we have is like this tenant oriented code base, we are anyway not going to scale to 100 tenants. We are only going to integrate with say 20 brokers or 25 brokers, out of which 15 are already there, right? So we are not going to solve this problem because we wouldn't have this problem practically.
great.
Right. So Ankit, I think we can discuss this outside of the talk. I have some patterns in mind which we are also trying out, but none of them is very efficient as per my understanding till now. uh,
Great. I think I also shared Gaurav's Twitter handle in the YouTube chat. And if you have questions, if you want to follow up, you can reach out to him on Twitter as well. I think one more question. Common UI logic. Yeah, I think.
Right. So, like, it is not very difficult because as a SaaS app, you own your features, right? You know that you have to build a certain feature. Now, when you integrate with the tenant in the tenant oriented code base, uh, then you need to just customize that, right? So, you build a base version of the component and then you build a customized version which just composes that base version, right? So, we have a common folder where we keep all the common version of the components, and then there is a tenant specific folder which just composes that common version and like passes it certain props based on which it can be changed. In most cases that is how it works. In feature oriented code base that is not a problem at all, because the component can just take decisions based on feature flags at runtime. So you don't need different versions of the component, you can just have everything in the same file also. But yeah, I mean, can have in multiple files also. So yeah, not a lot difficult to manage common UI or logic.
Yeah, Sridhar made a comment about module federation of Webpack. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think module federation helps more with micro frontends kind of setup where you can decide or load dynamic bundles from some application which is already built at another place, right? That is something that we are also exploring in one of our micro frontend setup, but we haven't found uh, any use case of module federation with the multi-tenant setup that we have. But in case, yeah, I think Sridhar has some experience. I would probably reach out to him because that would be helpful. Uh, Okay, I think Pawan said his Twitter DM is not open. I'll just open it, Pawan.
Yeah, yeah, maybe you can do it later as well. I think
Yeah.
should we?
Right. So this one is actually like a slightly bigger question to answer. It does not only depend on multi-tenant code bases or multi-tenancy. This has some general patterns which we follow as well. But yeah, I don't think we should answer that as part of the talk because this is a broader question generally. Preferred folder structure right now, as I said, if it is feature oriented, there is no difference in whether you have how many tenants you have, because there is not going to be any tenant specific code. It is only going to be based on config. But if you have a tenant oriented code base, Then the current structure that we are following is we have a separate folder for all tenant level customization. So that separate folder has tenant specific components, tenant specific services, tenant specific strings, tenant specific JavaScript code, and even tenant specific. There are some tenant specific feature flags, and tenant specific build configs that we have. So all of that currently is part of the same code base, but in different folders according to tenant. In future, or another way to do this is using a mono repo. Another way obviously would be to have multi repo, but then if there is a single team which is working on all of this, it makes sense for all of them to be co-located in some way. We have co-located it in single code base. You can co-locate it as a mono repo. If you have multiple teams because your tenants are so big and you need to customize a lot, then you can just have them in separate repositories as well. So yeah, that is our folder structure. Everything else remains the same. Like we have this functionality level separation, that one functionality will have all of its requirements co-located within it. So like if it is a route based functionality, so route and all of the components required as part of that route are part of the folder. So that is a very general pattern which I think everyone follows.
Great. I think we will take one last question.
Sure. Open source libraries available for data isolation and personalization on multi-tenant architecture. I think so. Like we haven't explored any of that, but for feature flag setup, which I was talking about, which is the core of any multi-tenant application setup, you can explore a lot of open source frameworks as well as a lot of services like Launch Darkly as well. Uh, yeah, but I'm not very much aware of any data isolation and personalization framework because the data isolation happens on the DB side. So which is what not something that I've covered here. And personalization, I think yeah, this depends on there are a lot of patterns for this. Like for example, theming, you have a lot of CSS patterns or CSS libraries which you can use, CSS and JS methods or CSS variables that you can use. For similarly for creating different version of components, you there is no library that I know of, but there are a lot of patterns that you can use. Like composition is one pattern that we use a lot. But yeah, I think that's my answer to it.
Great. Yeah, I think that's all the questions we have for now. And yeah, Gaurav, this was really helpful. And thanks a lot for taking your time and sharing your knowledge. And audience, if you have more questions, you can reach out to Gaurav directly on the Twitter. I shared the link on the YouTube chat. Yeah, so thanks once again. Thanks, Gaurav.
Yeah,
So we have
thank
our
you so
next
much, Kiran.
speaker. Great. Yeah. So we have our next speaker, Priyanka. She will be talking about why she choose to be a React developer. So I'll invite Priyanka. So Priyanka, hi Priyanka.
Hi, Kiran. Hi.
Yeah,
Just let me know. I'll just share my screen.
yeah,
Uh, just let me know if my screen is visible to you.
yes, yeah. It's visible. We'll
Okay.
get started.
Yeah, sure. So, good afternoon. I hope everyone is having a great weekend. So, yeah, welcome to my talk. My talk will be a bit different. It'll not be a technical topic per se, but then today I'm here to uh, talk about my journey, about my experience as to how and why I chose to be a UI dev. So, yeah, I'm Priyanka, and I'm a front end engineer at Disor Systems. You can find me at underscore Priyanka underscore 19 on Twitter and underscore Priyanka on Instagram. So, yeah, let's start. So, I'll start my journey. So, since I am a person who comes from a non coding background, I come from a biotech background, and I did my graduation from VIT University. And post my graduation, I started getting offers, which were mostly from pharmaceutical companies. But by then, I did not feel like, is there something which I really want to do? I did not feel that interest. So, and of course, I was not even excited to join. So, yeah, and at the same time, it was back in 2016, when my brother, who was working at Flipkart, and he was at that time, probably he was working on building his first Flipkart PWA, which is Flipkart Lite. So I used to see his work, and I was excited, and I really wanted to work like him. But then, yeah, I was confused, and I thought that I knew that of course, I do not have the required skills or the experience to do whatever he was doing that time. But yes, I was determined, and I don't know, out of front end was something which instantly brought that interest to learn more and to explore more in that field. So yes, at that point in time, I actually went on to my brother and I just asked him that what is that thing which made you to choose front end engineering? So he told me two things. I still remember that thing. So he told me the first thing is that in front end, you actually you very closely work with the users, and of course your work is directly consumed by the users. And the second thing which he told me is that you get an instant gratification of the quality of work which you do. You just code, you save, you refresh, and then everything you just see on your screen. So upon hearing him, I actually realized that yes, this is something even I wanted to do, and even I wanted to closely work with the users, and even I wish to get an instant feedback from them. So it was then when I realized that yes, definitely I'm on the right track, and I really want to explore more in this field. So yes, of course, my journey was not simple, and I had to face a lot of challenges in it. So the first thing, as I lacked the prior coding experience, as I already told you that I come from a non-computer science background. And the second thing which actually I faced is that at that point in time, I got placed in TCS and I was working professionally as well. So it was difficult for me to manage time, and I really had to juggle in between working professionally at my work and then looking into my new area of interest. So yeah, that was one of the major things. And the third, I think most of us here must have faced this. We all have fought this imposter syndrome. Even I have faced this during my journey. Most of the time when I actually started to learn, I felt at one point in time that no, I cannot do this. I think this is I do not have the potential, or I do not have the capability to do. So, but then I invested a lot of time to get away with imposter syndrome. And of course, I was working at that time and I was getting paid. Though the work which I was doing during that time did not interest me, it was not even satisfying either. But of course, I had a decent life. So it was actually what I would say, it was very difficult for me to make a decision to come out of that comfort zone and to venture into a new world which I was not aware of. So but then yes, I was somewhat determined, and I wanted to learn front end. I wanted to explore in this field. But then the question is, I have to do something to learn those things. So I have to understand what are all things that I need to learn. So then I came across these things that I have to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, frameworks, this, that, and whatnot. But yes, of course, I was overwhelmed at that time. But then yeah, every problem has a solution. Even I had a solution, and I did plan something for it. So yes, I started small and easy. So since I did not have any prior knowledge in coding, so my first focus was to learn programming. And of course, eventually I wanted to be a front end engineer, so I focused more on JavaScript and JavaScript concepts. So I started with very basic structures like numbers, strings, arrays, objects, loops, and then when I was comfortable with all those concepts, I then moved on to utility methods, which are associated with arrays like maps, filters, reduce, etc. but that technically does not make me a front-end engineer. Of course, I have to learn more front-end related stuffs. So for web applications and all, I took a reference from W3 schools, wherein I started to learn the basics of JavaScript, HTML, CSS, etc. Yes, and after that, I moved on to learn CSS, because CSS, as we all know, that in front end it is very important. And of course, you cannot add that beauty to an application without using CSS. So then onwards, I started to learn some CSS properties, and I actually invested a lot of time in learning the CSS layout systems like Flexbox. And once I was a bit confident with that, I started to learn more about web APIs like fetch, network calls, and etc. See, my goal in all these things is that every day or every time I just wanted to solve some small problems, just to build my confidence and to keep a track of my progress. So what I did in my journey is that I started to build some small applications. Like it's already there that I built some two-player games, or just a simple shopping cart wherein you can just load your products, and then you can just add that items in the item cart, etc. So yeah, these were some of the things which I did in my journey. But the most important thing which I could able to do it, or I found that point very useful, is that I took an incremental approach to learning. So what exactly that means? So see, I'll tell you that you do not have to be an expert, in HTML or CSS or JavaScript to become a front-end engineer. On the contrary, what you can do is you can learn a little bit of JavaScript, you can learn a little bit of HTML or CSS, and then you come back to the same point, and then you start again incrementally by by adding some little knowledge of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then you can reach to a particular milestone. And I think this was one of the reason I felt bit confident, and I really felt that yes, I'm doing a decent progress, and I am very much confident with whatever I'm learning or whatever I'm going to learn in future. So yes, incremental approach, I think it was one of the most important thing which helped me in my journey. So what is next? Of course, I had to learn some frameworks or libraries. So what I came to know is that in JavaScript, we have so many frameworks, we have so many libraries, we have Angular, we have React, we have Vue, and whatnot. But the problem was that I did not have the luxury to invest in all these frameworks to decide which one to choose. Rather, at that point in time, I had to be a bit objective, or you can say practical, to choose which one to pick. And after a lot of discussions around, I chose React. Now the thing is, of course, I'm also going to explain you some other reasons for which I chose React. So yes, there were so many reasons. So the first reason is React is ubiquitous. Now React is used everywhere, I think in large proportion. In, of course, in our software engineering part, you can see React is used everywhere. Even I see my brother, my colleagues in office, everywhere, their expertise is mostly around in React. So I thought, why not, let's give it a try? Why not learn React? So yes, after that point in time, I started to learn React. So I went through the documentation, and I tried to understood the concepts. I tried to understood why it is happening, or what is the concept behind it, and all those things. And once I was a bit confident in that, I realized that yes, of course, React has relatively an easier learning curve. So yeah, and of course, I would say that this was one of the reason, or you can say that it just pushed me that yes, I can do, and I can go ahead with React. So of course, now the third point is expansive and great community. the thing is, anything you want to learn, you definitely need to have a great community around. So as you can see that the React ecosystem is booming, and the community has always been very supportive. And actually, what I would say, that actually gave me the courage that if any time I get stuck at any point, I would definitely get that desired help from my community, definitely, without any doubt. So yeah, that also motivated me to choose and go ahead with React. And I was at that point in time, I think I was very much comfortable, and I thought that yes, this is the good decision which I took. And of course, the most important thing is compensation. So as I told you, I did not have a choice, and I was taking all my decisions practically. So of course, compensation plays an important aspect to it. So what I came to know, or what I saw even, is that the React jobs are in great demand actually. And I saw people are actually looking for React jobs. Very big companies, my friends at different companies, they work in React on a regular basis. So I think if I combine all these points together, I was very much convinced that yes, I mean, React is my calling, and I really want to do something in this field, and I of course belong to this place. So yes, of course, how can I forget about my React India 2019? It was, I think, one of the most amazing experiences that I have ever had. So React India 2019 was actually held in Goa at that time, I remember. And I attended this conference with my brother. He was giving, or he had a speech, something he was talking over there. So I just attended that. So yes, I what I want to say is that React India 2019 has definitely helped me in a lot of ways, which actually made my decision easier as to why should I choose React. So yeah, that was the most important thing, and I would definitely be thankful to React India 2019. I saw actually there many people. I would definitely call them intelligent people, who had come from different parts of the country to share their ideas, their views, their experience. And of course, it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of confidence. And honestly, I was very happy seeing them. And in turn, I was motivated, and I was like, okay, this is, even I want to do something like this, like in new future. So yes, and apart from that, I actually even got a chance to interact with those people who had come from different parts. And I would definitely thank them, because whatever I am today, I think a small contribution has been there has been some part, they have helped me a lot throughout this journey. So yes, and the most important thing, community, as I already told you, that the React community has always been very helpful, it has always been very supportive. So I remember when I attended React India 2019, I saw many people around me who were actually just like me, who had just started their journey into front end engineering. And they wanted to learn more, and they wanted to explore more in this field. So it was at that point in time that I realized that of course I'm not out of this place. I mean, this is okay, I belong to this place. So this is also one of the important thing which helped me to decide that I should definitely go ahead with React and pursue it as my career. So yeah, so taking inspiration from my family, to improving coding skills, to attending React India, all together these things contributed me in my decision to be a UI developer. So after that point in time, I started my preparations, and I started to give interviews. It was not easy, definitely it was not easy for me, but yeah, but that did not deter me. And by continuous effort, today here I am speaking with you all uh, at React Meetup. And yeah, thank you for your patient hearing, and I hope you liked my talk. Thank you. And of course, thank you, Kiran, for giving me this opportunity to come and share my experience on this platform. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks Priyanka for sharing your journey. Yeah, even I have a similar journey. Uh, at least I have an engineering background. I think you came from the pharma, right? Yeah, even I
Yeah.
transitioned from electronics to computer science.
Yeah.
Yeah, and part of the reason why I started this community is also because of the transition. It's
Thank you.
like
Thank
my
you
way
so
of
much,
time.
Kiran.
Yeah,
I was really thankful that you gave me this opportunity, because there are many people out there who really want to get into this field, but somehow they are scared that maybe I will be
yeah.
able to do because I come from a different background. So, yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, and definitely, yeah, communities help, to connect and learn from each other. That's one of the
Definitely.
reason the meetups and conferences.
Thank
We are missing the in-person meetups and conferences because of these pandemics. But
Yeah,
hope,
correct.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Hope at least at the end of the year we can have at least in-person meetups and
Excited for that. I really want to make this happen, physically.
conferences. Yeah, yeah. Uh, so yeah, I think we. So if you have any questions to Priyanka, you can reach out to her via LinkedIn. I think we have the link in the comment section. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Priyanka, for sharing your
Thank you.
journey.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a
Yeah.
lot.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
So yeah, we'll move on to our next talk, and Amit from Fifth Try will share his experience about building UIs. Uh, Hi, Amit.
Hey guys, thanks a lot,
Can
Kiran, for inviting me. Having a
Yeah, can you share
uh,
your screen?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can start.
Yeah. So we'll get started.
Sure, sure. So guys, I'm here to talk about FTD. It's so you can go to ftd.dev and presentation link is right there. So FTD is a programming language that we have created. So at Fifth Try, Shobit have been working on this language called FTD. It's short for Fifth Try document. It's a programming language that we have created to solve the kind of problem that Priyanka was just talking about. It's like if you want to come into front end or if you want to design a page, right? It's really, really hard. And if you expect a non-programmer to design a page, it's just virtually impossible, right? Like the previous talk, I think almost is a complete testament for how programming is really, really hard. Like CSS, JavaScript, the framework, madness. Uh, basically the learning curve is really steep, and then we thought, how do we kind of solve it, and that's roughly the main motivation. To give you some context, for example, this presentation itself is done in FTD, right? So FTD is a programming language which compiles to JavaScript, HTML, CSS, but currently that is the current state of affair. We do plan to also compile to, let's say, Android or iOS native, or maybe even terminal. So for example, you can write a n curses or whatever the terminal UI application in FTD, right? So we want to kind of create a full-blown UI language for virtually all. So one of the actual motivation was also what is called embedded systems. So if you look at the problems with front-end development today, one is the learning complexity, right? So it's extremely hard to learn. The other is also the actual load, right? So for example, this presentation, now if you see uh, fully downloaded is about, how do we find out? So this has the main page. Let me just show you locally. So right? So this entire presentation is so 236K, right? And this is ungzipped. And if you gzip this file, right? So as you can see, the gzip version of this presentation, which includes the entire CSS, JavaScript, everything, is 20 kilobytes, right? So we believe that currently we have these two problems. It's too hard to learn, and also the system resources required to power a typical, let's say, React website or whatever website is just too much, right? In 20 KB, full application is kind of almost unthinkable, right? Like if you talk about realistic applications. So, so this is what FTD has been like. So today, when it comes to authoring content, right? So if you generally think about writing something, right, that normal human beings can kind of use to give slightly better than. So today you have either Google Docs or all those WYSIWYG editors, which basically are not really great for you because you're kind of completely tied to that particular platform, right? So you either tied to Google Docs or Word, and they are famous, for not interoperating with each other. So what is the language that human beings should use, right? It can't be Word. The human being answer can't be. Markdown has tried, and it is actually a massively successful language in its simplicity. Today, we kind of believe that very soon, if you look at it, both WhatsApp and Telegram support limited Markdown, in their text input. So basically, today, probably billions of people are writing Markdown without knowing about that, right? So if you look at the forwards that you see, you will see a lot of funky annotations, markup that you're not aware of it, but it's being used in some syntax almost like Markdown. So Markdown is really great. But the problem is that Markdown is extremely simplistic. You can argue that's the strength of Markdown, but I believe that there's a really, really huge gap between, let's say, Markdown and, let's say, today React and JavaScript and stuff. So if you have to create a web page, if you look at most of the static site generators, right, they give you Markdown. But if you want to enhance it, you have to immediately go to CSS and JavaScript. And that's an extremely huge jump from the simplicity of Markdown to the complexity of JavaScript and CSS and so forth. Right. So we believe that something between Markdown and the JavaScript world should be possible, and that's where we. So today, if you look at, so today MDX, right? So I don't know if in the React world, a lot of people must be using Docusaurus, for example, right? So it's kind of lets you write Markdown content, but along with it, you can instantiate React components, right? So this is pretty great, and this seems like the current best answer, right, that we have for if you want to do something more than Markdown. It's like, unfortunately, it's not something, it's like massively more than Markdown, because you again have to go to React world, right? So, and despite that, despite this, like, for example, let's say you see in this code snippet, they are using this year, which is whatever, 2018 in this text block, right? But how do you, let's say you wanted to show it in yellow, how do you do that? There's absolutely actually no answer in MDX, right? So something as simple as highlighting some text snippet, right, is kind of virtually like impossible territory in MDX, right? You have to kind of go to full on giving up on this text and writing completely in React, right? And you effectively, React is, JSX is very successful, but ultimately JSX syntax is exactly HTML syntax. And you can say that the Markdown is a proof that people hate writing HTML, right? If HTML was so great and people so loved it, they would not have created Markdown. So Markdown exists because people hate writing HTML. And so MDX, in my opinion, in the way I've seen MDX used in Wild is that it's used for very, very limited, stuff. So it's not really a good alternative. It's definitely, I don't believe MDX is the future human answer. Okay, oh my God, the whole world should be writing MDX. I don't believe it's that kind of technology, right? Similarly, it becomes really complex, like MDX, which is about text. You don't know if this particular thing will be rendered as Markdown or not, right? You can't find that out without reading the source code of this particular thing or reading the documentation. Syntax is also such that if you have to write multi-line text over here, you again have to use backslashes, and it just, almost complete torture, right? If you wanted to write a multi-line string over there, right? And further, can that text itself contain MDX? Nobody knows, right? It's kind of a not really thought through solution, right? So let's look at FTD, right? So this is the syntax that we have come up with, right? So it starts with this dash dash. Then there is something. This can be, let's say if you are familiar with JSX, this can be treated as you're instantiating a component called hello, and you're passing this parameter called who to this particular. What is there interesting to notice is that we don't have to use this double quotes, right? So it sounds like a small thing, but it's if you are trying to teach programming to someone who doesn't know programming, explaining just how to quote a string is torture, right? Like you'll probably give up, especially if you're going to go to multi-line strings soon, right? So it becomes really complex really soon. And so here, this is the same example. Here we are trying to show you how the this hello component is internally implemented, right? So in this talk, we are not really going to look at how to create a FTD component that will expand the scope too much. We'll just look at the whole language at a very superficial. We are just going to browse through the language. How does it look like, right? So in this case, this is this component. The definition of this hello, right, is itself in FTD. So unlike in the previous example where I showed you this, the definition of this chart was in some other library, right? So somewhere some fall.js, and people have to learn a totally different language. Here, the component usage and the component definition is in both FTD. Right? So here we are creating a row, right? So basically, this is the UI that you want to create, right? So you want to show hello and then some sort of parametric, right? So we want to show world or something else. So here we are defining that component. So the component, the syntax we have tried to create is again, like we are trying to aim for human beings. So we have not used, let's say, indentation. And we have also not used, let's say, curly brackets, right? These are really hard. Like if you're trying to learn programming, just getting this right in the early days is torture, right? So we are trying to kind of remove, we don't have double quotes, right? And yet we have proper types, right? So like JavaScript, FTD supports types. So for example, in this case, because I have defined who as a string. So because I've defined it as a string, my parser knows that this is a string, right? So if you, virtually anything is accepted, but if you would have defined it as an integer or another data type, FTD would have rejected that program, saying this is integer can't have, let's say, hello or whatever. So here we are trying to create a component, and as you can see, we have defined types. We can use variables, right? So we have defined this variable and we are referring to this variable. We have created a subset of CSS. So we have taken CSS. We have actually, like among the 3-4 of us, we have gone through the CSS spec and all the CSS attributes commonly used, right? And we have kind of like figured out what is kind of the minimum set of CSS that we believe should be able to emulate most of the website, right? And it's modern. So I believe CSS is like CSS 1, 2, 3. It's like, it's just extremely overly complex, right? Somebody saying, yeah, I know CSS is just, I don't know of anybody who can say they know CSS, like 1, 2, 3, and the whole thing. It's just too complex. Everybody knows a subset of CSS, and it's just, in my head, not really needed. So what we have figured out is created is a subset of CSS. We have taken a huge amount of inspiration from CSS itself, but we have actually expanded on it, right? So we'll again not go into that. So here we have used two of the CSS attributes. Spacing, so the spacing decides the space between these two elements. So in this case, this is a container. This container contains two children, right? So you see there are 2 dashes and 3 dashes. So this is the limit of it. There's no 4 dash. So we actually had to, that's another thing that today, while even if you can learn, let's say JavaScript, even if you're fluent with JavaScript and so forth, if I give you a general text input, let's say, for example, if I give you a Gmail compose button and if I ask you to write JavaScript there, that is almost complete torture for you, right? So you cannot write JavaScript, even if you know JavaScript, without using again a very complex editor, right? So that's like if the goal is for human beings to learn some programming, right? Asking them to install this complex editor and configure it and blah blah, I believe is just not. And if you are building any application which takes input from users, right, which happens to be FTD, right? So you will have to provide them a first-class text editor which supports indentation and stuff. Here we have tried to remove indentation and curly brackets because we believe you cannot deal with curly brackets and indentation without a first-class text programming editor, right? So just to talk about the simplicity, if you look at the two programs, right, just look at this portion. So we have a data type called caption, which is basically nothing but an alias for. So if you look at it, how it looks like, there's a dash dash, then there's a kind of a section name till colon, right? And then there is something which comes after, right? So here you see this hello comes after dash 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 and something and colon. So this particular thing is called a caption, right? So in a lot of programs, it makes your code look very neat. And this different kind of matters, right? When you're talking about writing stuff, this is prettier, right? So that's how we have been kind of designing, like it's like a programming language like no other language, like it's a totally brand new kind of thing. So here in this case, we are defining a variable. So integer, so the size variable, for example, is integer, right? And the value of this variable is 42. A message, right? You define a variable called message whose value is this. As you can see, based on the type, we know we don't have to code things. Dollar, we use dollar to refer to variables. Right? So here, for example, this particular thing, this is the output of this. So not just basic types, you can define your own record, which is almost like a JSON object or a class or whatever you call it. So here I'm defining a record called person. It takes 3 attributes. It takes name, let's say company. So I want for every person, I want to store the name of the person. I want to store the company of that person. And I want to take an optional bio of that person, right? So all 3 of them are strings, but I've given these to caption and body as types instead of string, so that people can write this code, right? So here you're defining this record, and here you're creating an instance of that record. So you're creating a variable of type person. The name of the variable is Amit. This is the caption area, so it goes to the name, right? So caption comes till the end of the first line. So if your name was really longer, you'll have to use slightly different syntax. There's a continuation we'll talk about, but this is how you decide whether you want something to be caption or not, right? If something is caption, it fits in the first line. It is completely possible to have multi-line stuff. We all sorts of complex stuff are possible. So we've actually really looked at Elm, we have looked at Rust. We kind of so there's very little things you cannot do. Obviously, this is not meant for you to create your Gmail in it, right? So it's more like it's for creating a web page for you, right? It's like there's a difference between in the complexity, right? Like so if you want to have a application with thousands of people, developers collaborating on it, maybe FTD is not for you, right? But if you are creating a web page, consider a home page of most websites, right? So that need not be done in React technically. What are you getting by creating your homepage or the landing page in React. Like there's nothing really functionality wise. It's just a wrapper. You don't want to write HTML, so you write React or whatever. So I believe this is slightly better. I'll show you some more examples. So this is kind of neat, right? And obviously you can use this data in the UI subsequently. In this case, I am creating a list, right? So here I've created a variable called people. The type of people is person list. So it's a list of people, a list of persons called people. Here we are creating 2 instances and storing those instances in this people list, right? So by default, this list is empty, and then we are adding. So if you remember, the bio was optional. So in this case, I have not provided the bio. I have provided the caption, which gets mapped to name, and then I have provided company, and I have not provided bio. But in this case, let's say I have provided the caption, I have provided the company, and I have provided a bio, right? It can be any multi-line. So writing multi-line string is really, really easy, right? As it should be for a, because bulk of the stuff we are writing is prose. Here we are iterating over a variable. So here the list, right? So we are looping over the list. So the show person is a component, let's say, defined. I'm not showing the body of it. We are going to iterate over it. So we are going to create n instances of this show person, right? Virtually internally. And we are going to, so this is the list that we are iterating over, and this is the variable that we are binding it to. So we can also do conditional stuff. So for example, let's say you only wanted to show all those people who have a bio, right? Where for whom bio is not null, right? So you can use this if, right? So if is there, there is a event handling. So for event handling, so here for example, I have defined this variable boolean, and I'm basically saying this text, you can see me, is only to be shown when this variable is true, right? So I put if condition there, and I have this I have this text where if you click on this event, when click event happens on this particular text, we execute this particular action which toggles this variable, which happens to be this. And as soon as you toggle this variable, this will kind of go away, right? So as you can see, this again, entire presentation is done in FTD, and you can see the source very soon, right? You can also choose to either, so in the previous case, we used if to just not show something if the condition is not matching. But you can also choose to change some property, right? So here I am basically passing this funky background color true only when funky is true, right? So this attribute is, so you can kind of see the behavior of this particular button, right? So just consider this particular. So we'll take a look at a slightly more complex application. So consider this is the FPM. So FTD is actually 2 projects. We have created 2 projects. FTD is a language that I just showed you. FPM is a sister project, which basically is a static site generator, right? So if you write FTD files, like for example, I have been writing FTD files here, right? So where does how do I use this, right? So you can use this tool called FPM, right? So you can do FPM build, and it builds all the files, and it converts everything to JavaScript, right? So this entire site, like including this dark mode, for example, right? So this site is fully done in this thing. So it supports mobile optimizations and so forth, right? So as you can see here, the image itself is changing, right? So as you can see, it's really interesting, cool. So this is the kind of stuff you would want to build in FTD, not like Gmail. So let's look at the kind of source code to see. This is so far, those were like dumbing this thing, but this is the actual source code of this page, right? So this page that you see, this entire page is rendered from this source, right? So this is the entire source code of this page. So we have this import syntax. You can import packages. So you can import. So you can write your stuff into multiple packages. And here we are importing everything as FT. There's some configuration which defines some common stuff. There's some other package that I need. This ft.page is a component which sets up this entire page, including the header, the footer, and so forth. Then create section. So this section that you see, this section, this white area, this section is here, right? Then we have this breadcrumb. So as you can see in this page, we have this breadcrumb. So this breadcrumb data is part of that. It contains 2 links. So as you can see that. Then we have this template list, which shows all these templates in left to right, in a row fashion. So here we have used if. So as you can see, this is quite easy for me. The way I changed this is I copied the same code block twice, and I used a different image in both cases, and I added it to the dark mode. So depending on the value of the dark mode, this is either visible or not visible, right? So this entire page, right, is pretty. So the idea is that when I'm talking about a programming language for human being and people writing FTD and program, most people like, what are you talking about? Why would non-developers write code, right? Because we have actually created a world in which writing code or writing this kind of thing is virtually impossible, right? Like if I asked you to create this and asked, let's say, you to take a non-developer friend of yours or family member of yours and ask them to learn this, do it in React, etc., it would be really a lot of work. Whereas, so for example, this page that I'm showing you, this Ganga imaging site, this was done by my designer who basically this is the source of that, right? So my designer learned this entire FTD. He has zero prior, he never wrote even a single line of HTML, and he learned the whole thing in about 2 to 3 weeks, right? And afterwards, like he's just learning best practices and stuff. But he was able to replicate this, create this entire site in 2 to 3 weeks, right? And with absolute zero programming experience. So that's the idea. Key people are writing a lot of content, and it's not just programmers who are being paid, but everybody is creating a web page. So consider, let's say somebody wanted to create this architecture diagram, right? Like if I ask you to create it, you'll suddenly go for a SaaS solution. It's like human beings are deprived of technology that they can use to build this kind of simple thing. They are forced to use SaaS solutions, and SaaS solutions are just ephemeral, just coming and going. You have no idea what SaaS would be surviving after 10 years from now. You will probably most likely lose everything that you've written in most of the 2020s by 2030, because the company that you wrote it with will go away. That's why we created this to be completely so it's completely open source. You can use it. So consider this image, this cartoon, right? Like how do you create a cartoon with? This is just very hard. Like everybody creates a UI and so forth. So anyway, so this is this is FTD in short. You can create more complex apps here. Like for example, you're creating this kind of. So there's actually it's really under development right now. But the idea is that very soon you'll be able to completely replicate most of the UI. So thank you for listening. I would love to reach out and talk to you guys. If you guys have any questions, I'm available on Twitter. You can mail me on amit@webpages.com. This ftd.slide is available on ftd.dev. So you can just easily reach out. I would love to check out your questions now.
Yeah, nice talk, Amit.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, so I think we have one question already. Why prefer DD over language like Pug?
Uh, Pug, I don't believe, like I said, can you create a full-blown web application in Pug without learning HTML, CSS, JavaScript? I don't know, right? This is this
Yeah,
is
I think
this is not a
I
language, right? This is sorry, yeah.
yeah, I think Pug is like a templating language. They still
Hmm,
use things like p tag and body and everything. Like they still use the syntax of HTML.
hmm,
Yeah,
exactly. So you have to use a JavaScript with Pug or something. I don't believe you can use it standalone.
great. So if you have any other questions for Amit, you can ask now.
Mhm. Looks like no questions. Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it's a new language, right? New DSL. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So anyway, this recording will be available, and people can
sure.
reach out to Amit later on LinkedIn
Mhm.
or Twitter.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think we have one question.
Need to
Do we
install
need to install
something.
something?
Docs not found. Where did you go? It's like ftd.dev is the site that you have to go to.
I'm sharing your screen. Yeah, if you want to
Yeah,
show.
yeah. So ftd.dev is the documentation for the actual language, right? But if you want to use it, you will want to use install fpm. So fpm has a fpm is available to you. You can install using this script, or if you have a cargo. So this language is written in Rust, so you can install using cargo install fpm. You can start with these templates. So you can just come to fpm.dev and select a theme and just create a website. Oops, it looks like I'm not logged in. So if you're logged in on GitHub, this will take you to a GitHub repo creation, which will create a site for you from using a template. So there are these templates available. So we have created quite a few templates. So let's say, yeah. So this template, for example, you can start with. This contains it contains GitHub integration, etc., all set up for you. So if you use this template and you just create a fork out of it, you will be able to immediately see a site like this on GitHub pages. So yeah.
Yeah, so we have one more question.
There are no platforms to build websites. That's right. There are no code platforms to build websites. The same problem. You are tied to those platforms. The moment those platforms go away, it's like I'm basically asking, let's say, the whole of Indian government should switch to one language for writing all the documents that they are writing. Which one will you pick, right? You'll probably not want to pick React. You'll not want to pick one of those SaaS. They will go away, like 20 years, 30 years, they will be gone. So that's basically what we are saying. Human beings also deserve to have a power, and we want to give them this power. Writing code should be fun. I'm hoping you guys appreciate that. I think 7 billion people should be writing code. I don't. that's a mission. Yeah.
Great. I think that's all the questions we have for now.
Sure.
And
Sure.
yeah, if you have more questions, you can reach out to Amit on LinkedIn or Twitter. Yeah, thanks Amit for sharing your insights and the language you are developing. Uh,
Sure.
yeah, looking forward to more demos and more things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks Amit. We will move on to the next talk. So we have our next speaker is Darshan, and he will be talking about React Query. Darshan, can you share your screen? Hi Darshan.
Hi guys. Hi. Hi Kiran.
Hi. So yeah, we'll get started then.
Yeah. So good evening guys. My name is Darshan and today I'm going to talk about the missing piece of React ecosystem that I think and which is a React query. So before we get started again, let's start with my introduction. Hi, I am Darsan. I am an SD Internet Geeky Ants, and I generally work with React and React Native, JavaScript, and my favorite language is TypeScript, like one of the favorite language. Apart from the tech, I really love to watch sitcoms as well. Like I watch so many sitcoms and would love to talk about them. I am interested in public speaking as well. So like this is like the hobby. Like I never am a professional, but yeah, I do. And the blogging, like this is something like I started last year because I am learning something and I would love to share with the people who are there learning. So yeah, I write about technical, like there is a series called a crash blog of TypeScript. So in this I write about TypeScript, so you can get started with. Okay, so uh, I'm sorry guys. Okay. Okay, so the objectives, this is a really like formal thing to do whenever we do a PPT presentation. So today I really want to talk about React query. Like you will probably thinking like why another library? Why we need to think about another library? Why we need to install this library at the first place and increasing the bundle size? So again, this is something that we needed for a longer time. And again, we're going to talk about React ecosystem, the challenges we need to deal with whenever we do the API request. So this library is something that related to our API request and more specifically our REST APIs. So again, this is our sections or topics that we are gonna cover. Okay, the first section is the React ecosystem. Now, to be honest, why I love React and why everyone love React, because that it has a very wide or broad range of the libraries in this ecosystem. Like to managing a state, we have Redux. To handle the UI, to build a different or amazing or beautiful UI, we have something like Material UI. We have Tailwind. We have Theme UI. We also have native base. And to handle the navigation, we have React Router. To take care of the developer experience, we have ESLint, or we have a meta framework like Next.js, Gatsby, or something like Remix just came up last year as an open source. But we are forgetting something. Or before I can move forward, React ecosystem is like six infinity stones. So if you're a fan of Marvel, you will understand this. For the guys who don't know what is a Marvel, Marvel is a I guess you know, right? It's MCU, and there is the story of the six Infinity Stone. Each stone has their own power that you can use it. It's something like I can relate to the React ecosystem. Okay, I don't want to bore you guys, so I added some memes that we have everything. Like as a React developer, we think we have everything, but we really forget something. And you will like, if you forget something, then it wasn't important, just let it be. And yeah, you're right, just let it be. But we forget about the REST API, and this is really important because when the GraphQL came, GraphQL has this really amazing thing called Apollo client, which basically handles everything, and we don't have to write any extra logic to handle a GraphQL query. But what about REST APIs? REST API is really important part because no matter what you do, no matter even you are making to-do application, even if you are making a blog application or something like a SaaS application, REST API perform a really important part. And which is why I really want to talk about API request is mostly REST APIs. So when we are talking about REST API, you will see that okay, we don't have to do anything. We will install something like XCS. We will use fetch, and we will pass some authorization headers, and we will set the post and get, and that's we are done, right? Our data will be load, and we will list out all the data, and if something is going to wrong, we will do it. But if you are really if we are really concerned about user experience as an API request perspective, there are some challenges that we need to deal with. And this is something like caching, managing state, error handling, reducing the requesting, state synchronization, and all lots of things. I just mentioned some of them because this is really important, I think. So the caching is something like something that is hardest thing to do in a computer science, because when we are implementing a caching. And as a front-end developer, caching is nothing. Caching is something that we don't interact with often. We just use a global state management library that handles these states. But okay, by the way, Tanner Linsley was the author of the React query, and this is the podcast of the Tanner Linsley that I have listened. I have listened yesterday, so I just wanted to mention about this podcast, that how he is talking about UI state and server state. So this is a podcast with the Cancy dots. He's talking about why front-end developer, as a front-end engineer, we need to take care of the UI state and server state separately. Now you will talk like, hey, there is a different type of the states in a React application. Yes, there is a different type of states in a React application, like a UI state and a server state. So whenever we fetch a request, we basically treat that data as a UI state. Like we combine those data with the use state or use reducer. But they both need to treat it separately. The first thing, as you can see in the UI state, we basically build this state with help of the hooks, like use states and use reducer, or even we use something like Redux to handle a state as a globally. And on the other hand, we have server state, in which we basically use this state, access this state with help of the REST API or GraphQL. But what we will do is that we will basically take this data and we will combine that server state with the use state, and then we will show that data in a traditional React application, like I was doing till now. Like when I was fetching something, like when I'm building a front-end application and I don't care about the backend, and I will use some REST API which is publicly available, I will basically fetch this data with help of the fetch API or Axios library, and I will just use the use state library, and I will combine those data, and I will just list all the data. But you know what? This is really common thing, and we are just doing and we are repeating the code again and again all over the place. And that's what React query is solving. So again, there are two types of state. The first one is a UI state and the server state. Now UI state is something like we build to control the UI, something like just close the pop-up or just show the pop-ups or basically show the toast this, and something like this is related to the UI. On a server state, this is something like this is really different from the UI state because it has a different data structure. This is something as like maybe they have a different life cycles and all this thing that don't relate it to any UI blocks or any UI state. But we don't care about it. We just put this data to the states as a local state, and we just store them. So the challenges that React query is solving is that one of the I love it, and which is handling the API request, caching, state synchronization, clean code, and performance. I will going to talk about this one one by one. So the first thing is user experience. Obviously, user experience is one of the important concern that we need to take care of it. Because why user is using our application? Because we are providing them a great user experience. And whenever we fetch the API request, user experience is one of the important thing that we need to take care of it. Why? So let's understand this with the diagrams. So again, the very traditional client and server architecture, but I have just changed, slightly modified this library to understand as a front-end developer. So whenever we first fetch the API request, whenever we start fetching some API request, something like to-dos or something like movies or anything, so as you can see in the phase one, we will basically call that API with using fetch function or Axios function, which are available. And in the second phase, you will see that so in the second phase, we will basically get that response from the server. And the third phase is basically in the error phase, which we don't like it because it is something like something has wrong, something has really get wrong. Even either your client is offline or maybe your server is crashed or something, anything can be happen. So as you can see, the loading state and this three phase. So this three phase needs to be an acknowledgement to the user, like what is happening in our application. If you are fetching something, show the loading indicator. If you have fetched data successfully, show the list of the data. If something went wrong, show something like alert, like hey, something went wrong, please try again, and all this thing. And we basically handle this thing by writing our own logic. If I zoom in this diagram, you will see that this is something that we need to deal with as a phase one. So some loaders, it can be anything, it depends on your UI designer. In the phase two, we are just fetching some to-do list. And in the phase three, okay, if somehow something went wrong, just show the message, just show the error message. So this is something that we need to deal with, and this is a very obvious thing. No matter what you are building, network request is something is that you have to make it in your React application. Now again, so like I talked about in the last slide, this is something that we need to handle it our by ourselves. We need to write some logic by ourselves. As you can see that this is something is loading, set is loading, error, set error. This is a very common thing that we need to write. This is very common logic that we need to write in our application, in our component. So whenever we are communicating with our server. So I was a bit of confused, like why, like is there any good way to handle the API request? Or let's say, okay, that's fine, we don't write code like you, we just use something like Redux or any Mobux, and then we use a Redux Thunk, or maybe we use a Redux Saga to to handle this API request. Well, let me tell you the one thing, and that is that when Redux was built, it was never built to handle the server state. It was never built to handle the server API calls. Because why? That's why we need to add the middleware called the Redux Thunk and Redux Saga. Because Redux does not provide support for the API request out of the box. We need to add this library called Redux Thunk or Redux Saga as a middleware. So that's really true. And this is something, this really like a daunting part that we need to take care of it. Again, let's suppose if you are handling the API request with the Redux, as you can see, we have some asynchronous middleware, let's say Redux Thunk. So what the async middleware do is that, let's suppose you are sending some message to this server. Let's suppose you are writing, you have an email server and you are writing an email. So as you can see, as long as you click on the button, as long as your user click on the button, you are dispatching some sort of the events. Let's suppose is loading, and also you are fetching the API in the background, and also your dispatcher is waiting for that promise to be resolved. Let's suppose you are waiting for the promise, and then you have dispatches this loading thing as well. Okay, now as you can see, there can be a two different possibilities, the result and the error. And the result can be, let's suppose, okay, your email has been sent successfully, error, let's suppose something went wrong. So again, we need to disturb the entire global state to handle this, to handle our user experience. As you can see, this can be a little bit, I think this can be a little bit performance BT, I guess, because as you can see that we are doing a very tiny, we are dispatching a very tiny events, but it can have a really great impact. So that's why most of the people don't prefer Redux, or they use something like Context API to handle this kind of the locals to handle this kind of the state in a component tree. But still, use context is not for not for build to handle those kind of the states. Again, the server state. Context API is something that again you need that lets you to handle the component tree, that lets you to handle the UI. Again, I told you earlier, like toggling something or showing some pop-up, but it was never meant to build. It was never meant to handle the API request. So that's why React Query is here. React Query basically provide you catching, retry, refetch, and all the functionality that we ever needed to handle the API requests. So let's talk about caching. So the caching is something, if you don't have any idea about caching is something, it's a memory that relies on your device. So whenever we do API request, what React Query does is that React Query store that response to that cache. So again, any other time, if your client is asking for the same request, let's suppose you are fetching some to-dos. So what React Query does that React Query store that to-dos in that cache. So what happens that whenever your user is asking for the to-do again, let's say second time, so instead of making a request to the server, it will check that if its to-do is available or the caches or not. If it is available, it will basically return that to-do. So let's understand this diagram. As you can see, a React app is asking for a data. Hey, I need the data. And React caches like, let me check, like I have caches the data, or do I need to, fetch fetch the API call. So as you can see that since this was the first time, React cache is requesting for the server, like seems like I have to call to a server. As you can see, it's calling a server, and the fourth time when the server is returning the data, React query just catch this data, and also React query just return this data to the React app. So this will this will prevent to happen a multiple request at the same time. Let's suppose at the same time another component is asking for the same data. What React query will does that instead of making the another request, it will basically give that stale data. We also call this stale data. There is another library called use swr by Versal, which basically which basically has the same concept like stale by revalidated data. And this is really important. Let's suppose this is really important because you are avoiding a multiple request, and also catching is catching is something. This is one of the hard concept that we need in a competence science, that it's a kind of the complicated to handle it by oneself. So that's why React query provided out of the box. Another automatic retry is something that we have seen in a modern application. Something like let's suppose if you are fetching some data to the client and somehow it went wrong. So what will be sorry. So you will press a try again button. So what happens that this data will be retry to fetch it, but instead React query provide you a property called retry. This will basically refetch your data in a given number of times. Let's suppose if you are retrying for 3 times, React query will try to fetch this data 3 times, and then it will show the final message that okay, we are failed to retry your data. Refetching is the concept in which let's suppose if your user is having a multiple tabs, like here 1 2 3 4 and 5. So what happens that, let's suppose there is a tab, it's been opening for a while. Let's suppose a YouTube, your user is watching something or streaming something on a YouTube, and your website tabs is disabled for a long time, let's suppose 5 or 10 minutes. So what will happen is that, so whenever your user will go to that tab, it will refresh the data whenever we get a focus. Okay, mutation. So this is all about like get fetching a query, but we never talk about post and put. So this is something like, this is a really important thing. Like, okay, Darsan, we have seen like how to fetch data. You have just told me that this was really like high overview of a React query. But let's talk about mutation, like how to mutate a data. So for this one, we React query provide mutation. In the mutation, React query has some callback listener. So the first thing is that on mutate, on success, and on error. So as you can see that if you are working with something like chat application in WhatsApp, you will see that when you send the message, there is a loader, or there is something like a timer icon which show that your message is being sent. Okay, and the moment your message reach to the server, you will see the double tick or single tick. And then if something went wrong, let's suppose your client is offline or the network bandwidth what wasn't sufficient, so we will see the error message. So what is happening is here that we have to handle 3 different cases. The first one is that success cases. Second one is that the temporary message that temporary message that we need to show that hold on, your data is being sent. Your data is being sent, and the on error if something went wrong. So if you are building this application with that, this need to do a lot of work. This need to write a lot of logic by oneself. This can be a little bit overwhelming, and this is really like a very basic example. There are lots of example which has really complicated things that we need to do. Like whenever we do a API request, we need to handle lots of things. So this can be a little bit overwhelming. So what React query does that it provides you a mutation which has a listener something like on mutate, on success, and on error. So this callback will be called in a particular event. Let's suppose you just invoke a mutate thing. So this callback will be invoke on mutate, so you can like show some message or like temporary message, something like, hey, hold on, we are just fetching your data, or hold on, we are just sending your request to the client. In on success, this will tell you that okay, we have successfully made a API request, or any green toast. On error, we will basically tell the client that okay, something went wrong. So this is a very simple and very common example that we need to handle in a day-to-day in our React application. Okay, so it was all about how we can do API request, how we can mutate our data to a server. But now let's talk about the live example, because this was all about philosophy of the React query. Now let's see if it is really possible, or it is really like easy. So here I have an example in a code sandbox. Let me go through the example first. So here I am using the Disney API, which is available in the free. I am fetching a different API here. As you can see, I am fetching a different images here. These are the Disney characters. I am fetching. So what is happening is that my application is fetching these characters using the React query. So as you can see, this is a use query, and so whenever you use React query, you need this is a use query which used to fetch the APIs. The first one is the key. The key is really important, because whenever you do an API request, the React query will use this key to cache those data. And this is a callback. This is a very common callback whenever we do the API request. As you can see, we are fetching the API, we are taking the data, and we are returning this data. So this callback can be anything, something like a fetch call, which needs to be a asynchronized callback, which can be a fetch, which can be a XCS or anything. So we we are fetching a data, as you can see here. And the cool thing about it that we didn't have to write any extra logic to handle the loading thing or error thing or is error, because it provides the everything out of the box, and we don't have to write the extra logic. We generally write this entire block with a try and catch block. Try and catch block is something that's handle the error part. So as you can see, if something went wrong, we basically show the message something like, hey user, I think something went wrong at our server side, please hold on. But we didn't need to write that thing here as well. So as you can see, it's very simple and declarative approach to write or to make an API request. So here I am fetching the API, or whenever I click on any character, let's suppose I'm clicking on this Olu mail. So what is happening is that, as you can see, is loading is happening, and so that means that our client, our browser is basically making API request, and then we are showing the characters, all this thing. This is all about is this character is appear in more than 2 movies or in 2 TV shows and video games and all. But the cool thing about this React query is that if I reload this page, as you can see that the loading time was very minimal from the previous one. And if I go back, as you can see, let's go to your home page again, and if I click on this one, and if I go back, and if I again click on this one, as you can see that it was very fast. It was like your data was being stored in a client side. So as you can see, we don't need to wait for to load to make the API request, because React query basically cache that data in a cache, and we don't need to cache the data again. So again, if I do this, as you can see, the data is being stored in a cache memory, so it does not do another API request. And this is a character, as you can see, the character component, which is just representing, which is just displaying the images and the title. And if I click on this one, as you can see, this is the body of the component. in which I am using a React Router DOM to navigate between the pages. And let's see the another file, which is a character info. So here, as you can see, I am using a use query hook to make an API call. And as you can see here, I have used the array. The array, this can be anything. You can also use something like an object. If you are working with any search history, what you will do, let's suppose you will add some filters, let's say completed or anything. So the key can be anything, but which needs to be a serialized. So keep in mind this: whatever you are passing in the array, it need to be serialized. Again, I am providing a callback option, which is a async. That means this need to be resolved first. Again, I am returning the data here, and the same thing, like it is really easy, the way to write a clean code. As you can see, we don't need to write any extra logic again to handle the is loading and is error again. And this is the is tail. This is a common property that that React query provide to give you the like a simple message that if it is a stale data, that means the data is loading from a caches or not. So this is like React query is cool, and I really like it because now I can focus more on building a UI thing, because now everything is taken care of by React query. So this was all about React query, and I hope you will use this library React query in your next or existing project, and you will handle your REST API more efficiently. So thank you so much, guys, for for listening my talk. If you have any questions about it, please let me know. Thank you so much.
Nice talk, Darshan. Yeah. So let's see. If you have any questions for Darshan, you can ask now. I think we have one question already. Let me show
Okay.
that.
How has the experience been migrating traditional React Redux Saga? Okay, there is gonna be a lots of work, because whenever we use something like Redux and Redux Thunk, we have a lots of things. Let's suppose we are dispatching multiple things at the same time. So whenever we migrate from the Redux to a React query, it will take a little bit time, but it is really easy, because migration from Redux to React queries, all you have to take care of the keys. Like whenever we are working with Redux, we have to take care of the reducers, like whatever we are using, let's suppose users, to dos, and blocks. In a React query, we have to, this is something like a hash map. We have a key and the data, so we have to take care of the keys really carefully, because the key is an identifier of your API request. So it's very easy to migrate from the Redux Saga and Thunk to a React query. I think I have, yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. If you have any other questions, you can ask now. Sridhar, if you have, do you have a question?
Okay, this is really cool. It's a React query replacement of Redux, and I have expected that some of you guys are going to ask me this question. No, React query was not built to handle the UI state. See, there are two type of state available. The first one is the UI state, and the second one is the server state. UI state is something that we use to handle our UI, something like toggling a toast or showing some pop-up. And Redux was built to handle those states, because pop drilling was one of the annoying thing in the React that every developers was everyone wasn't like it. So that's why Redux came. But the problem is that every developer is saying that, okay, we have Redux. Even when I was learning React and I got to know about Redux, I think, okay, I have a Redux. That means I can build anything. But you know that server state and UI state, they are different part, and they need to take care of separately. So I'm not going to, I cannot say that React query is going to replace Redux, because this is not something that Redux is providing or React query is built for. Thank you. I hope I have make sense.
Yes.
Sorry.
So Praveen asked one question, but it's not very clear, I guess.
Uh, what is the error schema like HTTP error? So when we talk about server state, right? So the errors are coming from mostly it's from a server. Let's suppose 404 can be the error, 500 can be the error. So something this is, I guess, that can handle by the React query. So again, if I share my screen, you will see that here, as you can see, this is the error. So this is a unknown, but this is something like a string that you can get from the server, which has an error, something like something went wrong, or anything can be anything like a 500 server error or 404 not found. So this property will give you the like meaningful error that you even can show to the user. Or also it has another property called is loading here. Sorry, is error. So is error will tell you that whether there is an error or not. Okay, so this through property you can use it to display a meaningful error to the user. Yeah, I hope I have make sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we have one more question. How can we add authentication headers, and how
Okay.
could we do cache invalidation?
Okay, so there is nothing new in a React query, as you can see again. Let me share my screen again. So here, as you can see, we are generally using the traditional approach to do an API request. So in a fetch, we basically pass the headers as in the second argument. Like here, I use let's suppose it can be headers, and your headers can be goes here. Let's suppose authorization or anything. It's really up to you, like what authentication scheme you are using. But you can pass your token here. So this is not that React query is handling. This is a we need to handle it by our own self. So as you can see, this is a callback, and you can pass anything. You can pass even, let's say, method name. Let's say a method and post, or also you can pass the body here. So you can pass anything here. It's really simple. It was like the way we used to do an API request, but it is a really smart and good way to make an API call. And yeah, I forgot about the query. Yeah, the catch invalidation. So in a default term, React query invalidate your catch after 5 minutes. But if you want to invalidate your catches, so you can use a hook called there is a hook called use catch use query client. So this is a query client. This is the hook that we use. This hook basically take care of your catch. So what you can do here, that you can use catch dot invalid queries or invalid a particular query, and you just have to pass a key, as I told you earlier, that you have to pass this key here. So this will invalidate your query. So now if I pass this name here, and if I refresh my page, this will invalidate my query. This will invalidate my catches, and the React query will make a fresh request. React query client, I forgot to mention that we are using a React query client to handle the cache mechanism here, which is out supported by the React query out of the box here, as you can see. So this is something like a global storage. You can also consider this thing as a global storage, but all it is doing that it is handling our cache mechanism, and it is storing our server data into this query client provider. I hope that makes sense.
Great. I think I think the follow-up question is, other than caching, rest all can be done with a custom hook, right?
Other Yeah, but still there is no, like, you can implement your own logic to handle the API request. That's really up to you. But API request needs to do a lots of thing other than just showing the data or throwing some errors. So I think if you go to the documentation of React query, you will see that there are retry, there is a like window focus, like refetch when Windows is focused or not, and there are lots of things. So like if the satisfaction is not your overall goal is just showing the data or something, so you can just build your own hook and you can use it. Even I was doing it before I got to know about React Query. So it's really up to you, like even you want all the luxury of React Query or you are okay with your own logic.
Great. We have one more question.
Okay, do you think using React Query for API calls and using Redux for UI states? Yeah, it's really great. You can still use Redux with React Query. Uh, Again, Redux is for handling the complex state of the UI, so it does not relate anything to the React Query. React Query is totally built for handling the server states, and it does not relate to anything the UI state. So they both are different things. So you can easily integrate this thing. But I would suggest you that instead of using Redux, you can use Context API if your state is not that complex, because Redux is something like, this is a very debatable thing, like people are talking about state management, like which is a good library. Even Redux is great way to manage state, or Context API or Mobux. So I will suggest you that if your application's problem is getting solved using one of the strategy, you are good to go. So yes, you can use React Query and Redux in your application together.
Great. I think that's all the questions we have for now.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, thanks, Darshan. Thanks for sharing
Yeah.
all your thoughts
Thank
on
you.
React Query. It's useful. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Uh,
Okay, there is a
okay, I
question, I
think
guess.
we have one more. I guess. Let's see.
Okay. So if two components use the same resources and would refreshing one query in a component, would you also refresh the other component similar to Apollo? No, it will not refresh it will not re-render the other component, because if two instances using the same API request, React Query is really smart that it will basically cache that data. So it will not, instead of re-rendering, it will pass the old data which is actually having in the cache. So it will not cause any re-render, I guess. It will not cause any re-render.
Yeah, I think when two requests happening simultaneously,
Yeah.
I think React Query has some sort of deduplication as well, as I guess, right?
Yeah, it has a deduplication. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that makes
it will avoid duplication of requests as well. So the request will be happen only one time, but your both
yeah,
component will get different. Yeah.
yeah. But only one thing I'm concerned about is the string names. I think the string name should be
Yeah.
unique.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
key is really is a
key.
main role in the
Yeah,
React queries. So
and we should make sure we are not overriding them, and we should make
yeah.
sure we are not using different for the same API. Otherwise, we lose some of the benefits. Yeah.
Yeah, the key is something is something like if we take care as a JavaScript object, as you can see, key is a property. So if we override it property, the entire value will be gone. So yeah, it's really
Yeah.
important to take care of the key.
I think the Sridhar was saying the re-rendering will happen, just that we don't send the duplicate API request.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it still re-renders. If the two components are sending the same request, there will be only one request sent to the server, but both the components will
What?
re-render.
Yeah, if you're invalidate these catches, then it will re-render.
Yeah.
As I like mentioned this one, if if you're invalidating this catching, or if you are updating something in the catching, that I think the re-render will happen.
Yeah.
But I think I also need to check. Not sure
Yeah.
though.
If there is some change, I think re-render will happen.
Yeah.
Whatever mechanism it is there, if the data changes, components will re-render.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Okay.
So that's all we have, Darshan. Nice talk,
Yeah.
by the way. Um,
Thank you.
yeah. So we'll meet in the next meetup then.
Yeah. Bye,
Yeah.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. So yeah. So I think we came to the end of the meetup. I hope you all enjoyed this meetup, and we'll come back with another meetup next month. And we are also planning to do few workshops. Stay tuned for the updates. Uh, and follow us on Twitter, and join the meetup so that you'll get the updates. And if you want to speak in our next upcoming meetups, right, do feel reach out to us on either Twitter or Meetup. And yeah, everyone is welcome to share their experience here. Uh, so yeah, with that we'll end this meetup, and we'll see you again in the next meetup. Bye everyone.